Denver Broncos, New Orleans Saints, Thursday night football. Is it a snooze fest? I don't know. But if you're new here, welcome. My name is Max Loeb or Loeb's Leads, and I make one of these every single week looking at opposing statistical data to help you make, number one, the correct decisions for your fantasy lineup, starting and sitting the right players on Thursday night, and number two, the correct picks for your higher or lower pick'em entries. Now, if you're new and you're not subscribed already, make sure you hit that button below. And if you like this type of content, make sure you like the video as well. It helps me out a lot. But without further ado, we are going to break down this game. Now, if you are making picks on this game, before I say anything else, you can do so on Sleeper, and they will match your first deposit up to $100 if you use code LEADS, LEADS. There's a link for that in the description. It'll get you some free cash to make your picks with on the game, and you can use this data to pair that with a free pick of Spencer Rattler throwing for at least 1 yard. He's going to throw for at least 1 yard. Without further ado, though, let's talk about this data. If you guys have been here before, you know how we do this. We look at statistical data from the opponents, and we see if there's any early leans with places that teams are struggling. So we can start with the running back data, and it's a very, very plain and simple data set for this game. What I love to look at before anything is receiving yards allowed to opposing running backs. And we'll look at the last 5 weeks, so make sure everybody is in the same sample size here. But you look at the last 5 weeks, and you try to look at the top 10 or bottom 10 to see if there's any lean with a defense that's giving up a lot of targets or catches to opposing running backs and receivers and tight ends too. And you look at the top 10 here, right? Colts, Cowboys, Giants, Raiders, Buccaneers, 49ers, Packers, Jaguars, Saints versus running backs. 257 yards. That's the second most over the last 5 weeks, right? You look at receptions, they will be closer to the top. Doesn't look like top 5. 26 receptions to opposing running backs in the past 5 weeks. So when we see that type of data, here's what we do. We move to the opposing routes run for that team. Now we will go to the Denver Broncos opposing routes run. We will stop sharing this screen. We will go to the Denver Broncos opposing routes run. And we'll pull this up really quick. So you go to receiving and you go to routes run, because ultimately we know if the New Orleans Saints are giving up a lot of routes and a lot of receiving yards to opposing running backs, we want to see which Denver Broncos are running the most routes out of the backfield. Now, immediately, you'd probably just think Jaleel McLaughlin, but you want to make sure. And you look, it's Javonte Williams, right? Javonte Williams, 96 routes out of the backfield, and he's running 94% of his routes overall from out of the backfield. He's gotten 24 targets on those 96 routes, about a quarter of a target per route run. And if you extrapolate the 96 routes over 6 games for the Denver Broncos, that's roughly 16 routes per game out of the backfield for Javonte Williams. So if you're looking for early leans with player projections, higher or lower, Javonte Williams receiving yards is where we are going to start. Does that make sense to everybody? I think it does. If you're in the comments section, let me know what Javonte Williams' projection is right now. We'll see if it changes before kickoff, because this will go out about 24 hours before kickoff. But that is a very early lean for us right now in terms of receiving yards. Now, we will look at the other pieces of data here. There's a lot of other good data, and we'll do the same exact process. We'll get everything we need from the opposing data given up. And again, you didn't see anything crazy with receiving yards with the Denver Broncos defense. And then you look at rushing yards. Saints are bottom 5. That's across 5 games. Denver hasn't been able to run the ball really well. So if you want to pair Javonte Williams with his rushing and receiving yards, sure, go ahead. But overall in your fantasy lineups, Javonte Williams is a very good start this week. Now, you know there are no automatic starts and sits in fantasy football, right? There are no players that you absolutely have to start. There are no players that you absolutely have to sit. But immediately looking at Javonte Williams, he's got a really good matchup in terms of the receiving game. He should have plenty of receiving yards. That's our early lean for a player projection in the game. And the Saints are giving up a little bit above 100 yards per game on the ground to opposing running backs. Another interesting note, this is being recorded moderately early on Wednesday afternoon. I'm not sure when you guys are seeing this, but Chris Olave has been ruled out for this game with a concussion, and Rashid Shaheed is undergoing surgery, I believe, Thursday on a meniscus injury, so he's not playing. You're without your top 2 route runners for the New Orleans Saints. What does that mean? Let's go check out who runs the most routes for the New Orleans Saints, both out wide and the slot. outside of their top two guys because they're losing. Now, obviously, Alvin Kamara is going to have a lot of routes out of the backfield, right? 82 routes out of the backfield. He's going to be a pretty big part of this game. But you look at the overall routes run as Shaheed Olave Kamara. You have Juwan Johnson running 109 routes, and I assume a big percentage of those are from inline. So we got 61% of his routes come from the inline, and 28.4% come from the slot, which makes the most sense. Now, the other one, Mason Tipton, that's the one I'm looking at, right? 67.5% of his routes come out wide. So that's very important to note. Mason Tipton, the fifth most routes on the New Orleans Saints, runs the majority of his routes from out wide. Now, what we really need to see, especially with Rashid Shaheed, out, is who runs the routes from the slot, because it was a lot of Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, actually pretty much evenly distributed. And it's Mason Tipton again. Cedric Wilson runs 23 routes from the slot over, 6 games for him. And Cedric Wilson is the number 7 route runner on the New Orleans Saints. So now what we need to do is check out where the Denver Broncos defense allows a lot of their targets to go, because the reality in this game is the New Orleans Saints are probably going to be trailing. They're probably not going to be able to run the ball super effectively, but you know who plays corner for the Denver Broncos. I know who plays corner for the Denver Broncos. You want to try to avoid the Pat Surtain shadow. So when we look at out wide rate for opposing teams, my guess is Denver is towards the very bottom, right? Yeah, they're bottom 5 in terms of out wide target rate in the NFL. Now, slot target rate, Denver is right in the middle of the pack, 33.5%. Inline target rate, Denver is, here we go, 5th highest inline target rate in the NFL for the Denver Broncos, which is very important to note because, like we just talked about, Juwan Johnson, he is the 3rd highest route runner on the New Orleans Saints, and he runs about 29% of his routes from the slot. So he's going to get targets in the slot. And as you look at the Denver Broncos defense overall against tight ends, the 7th most yards allowed to opposing tight ends in the NFL the last 5 games. And listen to this, the most receptions allowed to opposing tight ends in the last 5 games. So if you're looking for a streaming option, if you're looking for a player projection, Juwan Johnson, yards and catches, we absolutely love that. But a streaming option, if you have somebody like Cole Kmet on a bye, Jake Ferguson on a bye, this might be as good as you get because Juwan Johnson is not available in a ton of leagues right now. He is a very, very good option for you if you need that streaming option. I personally love Juwan Johnson this week, but we need to look at the Denver Broncos pass offense before we do anything else because it's kind of been stagnant. I haven't loved what I've seen. Overall, offensively, they're struggling a little bit, and we kind of expect that with the Denver Broncos. But the biggest thing we need to find out here is where the New Orleans Saints allow their targets to go. So look at the out wide targets. New Orleans Saints are top 3 in the NFL. 46.6% of the opposing team's targets when they pass against the New Orleans Saints go out wide. So you guys are getting used to this. You guys are knowing what I'm doing, especially if you've been here for a couple weeks. What's the next step? I'll give you guys 5 seconds to think about it and say it out loud. All right, 5 seconds is up. We go find who runs the out wide routes for the Denver Broncos. It's obviously Courtland Sutton to some degree, but we can't always lean on the number one, especially when you have a guy like Marshawn Lattimore on the other side, right? Courtland Sutton, 181 routes, 85% of them out wide. But here is what we love to see. Josh Reynolds, 79.1% of his routes from out wide, 87 routes overall. He's the number 2 out wide route runner on the team and number 3 route runner overall, only behind Lil Jordan Humphrey, who's the main slot guy, and Courtland Sutton, who's their true number 1. So again, a player projection overall, Josh Reynolds receiving yards. We love that. We obviously want to do the math. And again, if you guys are in the comments section, let me know the player projections for Josh Reynolds, his current yards, see if that changes before kickoff. But Josh Reynolds yards, and then Courtland Sutton, if you're looking at start sits, again, there is no automatic start and sit. Hands are up. There is no automatic start or sit in fantasy football. That does not exist. But generally speaking, Courtland Sutton is a good start this week against the Saints defense, who allows a lot of targets out wide. The only issue here, like I said, I think the Denver Broncos are probably going to control this game, and they can on the ground. The Saints' run defense has not been great recently, and they allow a lot of targets to opposing running backs. Opposing running backs are really, really productive against them through the air. You couple all those things together, and I want to look at the pass yards here really quickly. it may be in everybody's best interest who's watching this video to look at Bo Nix yards because over the last 5 games, the Saints are allowing the most pass yards in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks. So 1,500 yards over the last 5 games. That's roughly 300 yards per game. And I'll read you some game logs against them the last 5 games so you can get a sense of which quarterbacks are playing against them and how they're doing in these games as soon as it loads. We have last week, Baker Mayfield, 325, 4 touchdowns. 2 weeks ago, Patrick Mahomes, 331, didn't throw a touchdown. Kirk Cousins in week 4, 238. Jalen Hurts in week 3, 311. Dak in week 2, 293. And then you look at week 1, it was Bryce Young. Like he threw a 161. So anytime they've played at least a competent quarterback, honestly above average quarterbacks the last 5 weeks, they've given up what the lowest is 238. Again, let me know in the comments what Bo Nix's current projection is, but I'd be hard-pressed to believe it's much more than 200 yards. So you couple all those things together. If you're in the boat where you think New Orleans Saints can keep this game close, Bo Nix pass yards could be a really good one. But right now, the early leans for the player projections and the yards, the more or less you guys understand what I'm saying, is Josh Reynolds receiving yards. I'm going to say Javonte Williams scrimmage yards because I think Denver is going to control this game. I really do. And then Jawan Johnson receiving yards. Now we can look at some other numbers, other leans. We'll go to the run scheme data really quick because I know a lot of you guys like the run scheme data as well. And check the efficiency numbers because I would like to see what Alvin Kamara is projected because at the end of the day, when you don't have your number 1 and number 2 receiver, you're going to lean on your running back a little bit more. So let's check out the advanced rushing defensively for this Denver Broncos defense. I am hard pressed to believe we're going to see anything that's super crazy. In terms of yards per carry, Denver is 5th best in the NFL. In terms of rush yards per game, Denver should be right around here, 13th best in the NFL. In terms of overall attempts, Denver is okay. So they're bottom 10 in overall attempts. So, if you're generally speaking, if you're playing a good team, they're going to run the ball a little bit more if the game's going to be closer. They're not allowing a ton of yards after contact. Let's check out the stuff rate. Denver is top 10 in stuff rate. Touchdown rate, if they're below the first half, they're outside of the top half in the NFL in terms of touchdown rate. They are allowing the Denver Broncos. They're allowing the 4th or 5th fewest attempts inside the 5-yard line. So for me, Alvin Kamara, you're not going to bench Alvin Kamara in your fantasy leagues. But when you look at overall player projections, especially because Denver isn't allowing an insane amount of targets or isn't allowing an insane amount of yards to go to opposing running backs. Let's check targets because I do think they're in the top half of the league. I would lean away from Alvin Kamara's projections just in general because I think they can zero in on a guy like that. Denver is tied 7th in terms of target rate to opposing running backs and screen. Here we go. Design percentage. Denver is getting screened at the 5th lowest rate in the NFL. So again, I lean away from the Kamara projections just in general. In fantasy, you're obviously not going to bench Alvin Kamara. I wouldn't ask you to do that. I would be a coward if I sat here and told you to do that. But Alvin Kamara projections generally get out just a little bit. Projections, fantasy lineups that we do like, though, generally speaking, we'll go through play-by-play. Bo Nix against a Saints defense giving up the most pass yards in the NFL the last 5 games is generally a good start. Again, if you're looking for a streaming option in a deeper league where you have Dak, Caleb Williams, I would feel comfortable starting Bo Nix if you didn't have any other options. I would feel comfortable starting Bo Nix. On the other side, Spencer Rattler, Denver's pass defense is pretty good, so I'm staying away there. The running back world, Javonte Williams has an awesome matchup, right? You have a defense allowing about 100 yards per game on the ground, bottom 10 in the NFL of overall receptions and yards to opposing running backs. They are the worst in terms of receptions given up, and they are, I believe, bottom 5 in receiving yards given up to running backs over the last 5 weeks. So Javonte Williams, solid start. Again, no one size fits all. in terms of start sits and fantasy, but solid start. We love his receiving yards projection as well as his scrimmage yards projection. On the off chance the game is close, I'm not going to go just rushing. I'm going to go overall scrimmage yards as well as receiving yards. I like that a lot. On the other side, Kamara, you're not going to bench him if he's on your fantasy team, obviously, but a little more cautious. Denver's pretty good against the run. They're pretty good against running backs, although they do allow a higher percentage of opposing targets to go to running backs. The interesting thing here, as I said about 10 minutes ago, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are both out. So you lean away from that a little bit. The expectations for Kamara are brought up a little bit, but I'm still not touching his player projections. The receivers, Cortland Sutton, good start, but I think the projection I'm looking at the most is Josh Reynolds because I worry about a Marshawn Lattimore shadow, especially because of how much man the Saints play. If I'm looking at a projection, Josh Reynolds receiving yards. Now start sits. Cortland Sutton, generally speaking, is a good start for your fantasy teams. Saints are without the number one, number two receivers. You would think, we say Cedric Wilson, any of those other receivers on the depth chart you'd look at. I'm looking at Juwan Johnson. One, you're avoiding the Pat Surtain shadow. That's obviously very good, right? But number two, the Broncos are giving up the most yards to opposing tight ends the last 5 weeks. They're also giving up a ridiculous target rate to opposing tight ends and slot wide receivers. Juwan Johnson runs about 30% of his routes from the slot, and now you're losing two guys who are running about 10 routes from the slot per game apiece. He's going to have to step in, run some more routes. I think he'll get plenty of opportunities there. So you look at receiving yards projections for Juwan Johnson, receptions projections for Juwan Johnson. I absolutely love it. So the projections we're looking at, we got Juwan Johnson, we got Javonte Williams, and we got Josh Reynolds. Cortland Sutton, good fantasy start. Bo Nix, good fantasy start. Juwan Johnson, good fantasy start. And obviously, again, you're not benching Alvin Kamara. But that is all we have for the Thursday Night Football data breakdown. Again, if you guys enjoyed this stuff, you enjoy videos like this, and you're new, my name is Max. I make one of these every single week, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any. But I will see you guys next time. God bless you, and good luck Thursday night.